We're continuing in Halacha Gimel, which is about wine that's Mevushal. Last time we spoke out the Rush and some details about that, about why wine that's Mevushal is doesn't have a problem with Stam Yain. Why wouldn't it be Stam Yain? Today we'll go to the next step of it to talk about the temperature that the juice or wine has to get to in order to be considered Mevushal. And then we still have one more time afterwards to talk about some of the more modern versions of that question. So today we're going to avoid those modern parts of the question a little bit. We'll talk about some things like that, but not really. Today we're just going to talk about the temperature in a like to use a more theoretical sense. We'll talk about Ramaisa, but in a more theoretical, and then next time, Rich Hashem, some of the very practical questions that people have brought up. Okay. So we saw this. I mentioned this time that there's in the Rishonim, the Gemara doesn't say what it takes to be Mevushal, for wine to be Mevushal. It just says that Mevushal is mutter. So the Rishonim, the Beis Yosef brings different shittas in Rishonim to explain what it means to be Mevushal. One of those shittas is it should be Mishihir Siach, like it says over here in the Shulchan Aruch, Mevushal Mishihir Siach Agabi Eish. That's from a raya from Hilchos Shabbos. And then others bring a raya from in Yerushalmi and Trumas, where it has to, you have to be Yismai maybe Dasari or something to that effect. Which of course for Truma that's relevant, because the reason why you're not allowed to cook up the Truma wine is because you lose some of the Truma that's wasting Truma. Okay, so that's what the shir is over there. So they bring rayas from that to what Mevushal is. Okay, so now, if I just told you that, you would tell me that those are two different things. Those are two different measures of how something has to be. Now, it's not like the same people say both. One is a raya from Shabbos, one is a raya from Trumas, and two different things have nothing to do with Mevushal for wine. But if you heard both of those things, you would say, "Oh, those are two different shurim." That's what you would think, okay? But the Sheikh says that's not true. He says if you look, the Rashba and the Ram bring this, that there's these two different days, and they say that's exactly the same thing. Okay, it's two different measures. Again, it's not. None of those are talking about Mevushal for wine. It's rayas from Truma and from Shabbos, and they said it's really the same thing. When you hear Siach
about wine, at least.
Yeah, it's talking about. In Truma, it's talking about wine, and on Shabbos, I don't think so. Okay, in Truma, the point is by Truma, you're not going to waste the Truma. Okay, so it's talking about wine. He brings from the Raj, from the Ram, it's the same thing. It's just two different ways of measuring. When it should be Mishir Siach, and it's Yismar Midas, it's the same thing. Okay, that's what you would say. Okay, but another thing is, before I tell you the but to that, another thing is that the word Mishir Siach, Hirsiach, what does it mean? It's Hirsiach. So the raya here we're talking about from a number of achronim who I'm going to mention in a few minutes, a number of contemporary achronim say the word Mishir Hirsiach, like here in the Shulchan Aruch, means it becomes Yatzel Edespot. Okay, that's partial. And the raya is from Shabbos, because the din Hirsiach is coming from the din Hilchos Shabbos, and Hilchos Shabbos making something to be Yatzel Edespot is official on Shabbos, and that's what it means. So Mishir Hirsiach means that all these achronim who we're going to talk about in a minute agree that the Shulchan Aruch and Mishir Hirsiach means it should become Yatzel Edespot. Okay, the question is the Shach. Okay, the Shulchan Aruch says Mishir Siach, and the Beis Yosef tells you that Mishir Siach and losing from Midas is the same thing. The question is the Shach. Okay, the Shach says on this Shulchan Aruch, the Shach says is 10 words. The Hainu she'isma'ik Midasi Aidei V'sicha Ken Chatzav Rav Quran. Okay, that's what the Shach says. Okay, so now if Yisma'ik Midasi and Mishir Siach are the same thing, why is the Shach bothering to tell us that? What did he add by that? The Shulchan Aruch left it out because there was nothing to say. Because the Shir Mishir Siach and Yisma'ik Midas is the same thing. So you don't have to tell me both of them. So that's why the Shulchan Aruch left them out. The Shulchan Aruch didn't have to say both of them because it's the same thing. So it's like saying in Fahrenheit and Celsius. You don't have to tell me both. Tell me one, and I understand they're the same thing. So what's the Shach adding when he tells us this? Okay, so on the one hand, the Shach seems to be telling you that he thinks they're not the same thing. Okay, they're not, which would be the simple reading, that they're not the same shear, and therefore he's telling you, and I want you to do this. He's mentioned that that's the shear for a reason, okay? But there's two reasons to think.
Is it telling you a length of time?
What?
The
what?
It's telling you a length of time of how long you have to leave it for.
So we're going to get to that in a second, but the Beis Yosef, and none of the people until you say anything about that. Nobody says anything about that. They just say, She'ismak Midasai and She'Hirsiach. That's the same thing. Okay, so either it's the same thing or it's not the same thing. Okay, so why is the Shach mentioning this thing? Okay, but
scientifically, is there any reason to think that by bringing something to the outside,
I'm going to get to that. I'm going to get to that. Don't be afraid. Okay, so now there's two reasons to think that the Shach agrees with what the Beverages says, and that's because first of all, the Shach starts off with the word dahainu. Okay, dahainu means that is to say, meaning it's the same thing. I'm not arguing with you. I'm not saying something different thing. Dahainu, it's the same thing. And also because he ends off with this Ken Kasa Faraj Buharan. Okay, the Raj and the Ram are the ones who say that they're the Rishonim who say that Yismael Mivdasa and Hisiach are the same thing. That's the one who the Beverages brings. So when he says dahainu, Yismael Mivdasa Ken Kasa Faraj Buharan, the Raj and the Ram are the ones that the Beverages brought who said that the same thing. Okay, so that's reason to make us think that the Shach is not arguing, although it's odd, why would he mention it? But it makes us think that he's not arguing because he says, can't cause Raj Baran, and that's exactly the ones who said that it is the same thing. Okay, so no, it's not like he's mentioning a Raj from Uktzin someplace. That's right here on this din, that's what they're talking about, and they say that it means the same thing. Okay, so in Igros Moshe he says, that's what the Shach means. Like the second way I'm telling you. That the Shach means to say exactly the same thing as the Mechaber. He agrees that the same thing. Moshe says maybe even the Shach thinks that Yismael Midas is less than Yatzlez. Okay? That's really unexpected. Moshe says that's what the Shach means. He says the Shach is telling you the same thing as the Mechaber, like the Beverages have said that Mishasiach and Yismael Midas means the exact same thing. Okay? And Moshe says, and I'll tell you, he says, it's Pashut. Everyone can tell that when you get to be Yatzlez way, it's Yismael Midas. He says it's Pashut like that. There's no question like that. And I have another right that it means like that. He says it's because, I have another right like that, because remember that the Rosh says, we learned this out from Hilchos Shabbos. We learned that from Hilchos Shabbos. The Rosh says, well, in Hilchos Shabbos, he says, how hot, I told you a second ago that if you get, bring a liquid to Yatz Leather's boy, it's considered Mevushal. The Rosh says, how much is the maximum that's considered Mevushal in Hilchos Shabbos? Ramesh says, I'm going to talk about that in a second, just accept it for now. Ramesh says, guess what? Once a liquid gets to be Yatz Leather's display, that's the max for Shabbos. There is no further amount that needs cooking, a type of cooking that can go past there. That's it. Once you hit Yatz Leather's display, you're finished with all the cooking. So if that's the maximum for Hilchos Shabbos, there is nothing higher than that. There's no such thing as cooking it beyond Yatz Leather's display. You can make it hotter, but it has nothing to do with the Isser Bishul. He says there's no Isser Bishul past that. So when we're learning at Stam Yayin from Hilchos Shabbos that the word Mevushal means the same thing. So then, what could it possibly mean? How could it possibly mean? Anything higher than that? Okay.
What is water source single?
We're going to get there. Just be patient. Okay, we're getting to that. Okay, so there's truths now. That's what Moshe says. Now there are truths from Dain Weiss and Rav Azar who agree with a lot of the things that Moshe says. I don't believe that they quote him, but they agree with a lot of things that he says. They say, like I said to you before, that Hisiach means Yatz Leather's boy. That's correct. They say the Mechaber means only Yatz Leather's boy also. That's true also. They agree with that thing. Okay? They're even reasonably convinced that the Shach might mean the same thing as the Mechaber, like I just told you. And Rav Asher has an extra reason why Ashkenazim, whatever, not negated to us, that's the reason why the Ashkenazim should be Mekel. But in the end, both of them say that you should be Machmir and say that the Shach means a higher temperature, and therefore, when the Shach says that Yismael Midas have their Ritzicha, he needs a higher temperature. Okay? Now, I'm going to explain to you in a minute. They don't tell you what that temperature is. They say it has to be to a higher temperature. Okay? Now, we're going to come to now explain what do they mean by this high temperature. But first, I have to just say an interesting raya from Rabbi Shechter. Okay? Just, to me, it's an interesting raya. That's what I'm going to mention to you. And that's like this. The Gemara says, the Gemara Avodah Zarah that says that wine that's Mevushal is mutter. It says like this. Let's look at the Gemara. Yain Mevushal, Ein Mishum Nisuch. Okay? Right? If Yain Mevushal doesn't have no Isser Nisuch. And then the Gemara says, Ibaylahu. What about, does Yain Mevushal have a din of Gilui to it also? Okay? I told you that doesn't have a problem with Nisuch. What about Gilui? Okay, Gilui means this, that if you leave certain liquids uncovered, a snake might be poisoned into it, and if he does, then you can't drink it. Okay, so what happens if it's Yain Mevushal? Would that be a problem of Gilui also? We want to say Tashma, that no, Yain Mevushal does not have Gilui to it. Okay? So now, the way the Gemara says it, this is one quote from the Gemara, but the Gemara is back and forth about Yain Mevushal for Stam Yain and for Gilui, makes us think that it's the word Yain Mevushal means the same thing for both of them. Okay? Yain Mevushal doesn't have Nisuch, doesn't have Gilui. Yes, it doesn't have Gilui either. There's a machlokes in Gemara, different shitas. But the word Mevushal means the same thing for all these things. Okay? So now Rabbi Shach says, now let's go look at the Rambam in Hilchos Ritzach. Okay? Where it talks about the din of Gilui. So like this. Yain Mevushal, a bunch of things, and Ein Behem Mishum Gilui. Among the other qualities it has is Ein Behem Mishum Gilui. Okay, that's what the Gemara said. The Gemara said, Iboilu doesn't have Gilui. The Gemara says, no, it doesn't have Gilui. Then the Ram says like this. V'yayin Ermayim V'chol Shayu Chamin. They were warm, they were hot. Kos Mancha Hevel Oil Mehem Ein Behem Mishum Gilui. While smoke is coming out of them, then there's no Gilui either. Because he tells you that snakes are afraid of the steam and coming up, and they won't eat it. Which is to say, so Rishak says, look, Yain Mevushal doesn't have Gilui. If you Mevushal wine and then it cools off, Ein Behem Mishum Gilui forever. It's never going to have Gilui. But there's a different thing. When wine is hot, while it's steaming, there's no problem. If you leave it left alone for 15 minutes and it was steaming, you don't have to worry that a snake drank out of it. That means it's just during that time, but if it cools off, now we have a problem again. That means there's two things. Mevushal is a higher temperature than just chamin. If it's chamin with hevel coming out of them, that's the temperature that temporarily keeps the snakes away. And then Mevushal means there's a higher temperature called Mevushal. So
why isn't someone's already cooked ones in the process of being cooked?
So because if the second thing is if it's being cooked, if it's hevel oil mehem is considered that's Mevushal, then it's not a problem just while the hevel's coming out of them. No, Yain Mevushal doesn't have Gilui.
Right.
Then he continues and he says this. And then there's a lower stage when it's not Mevushal yet. At that point, it temporarily keeps the snakes away. During the time when it's at that hotter temperature, it keeps the snakes away. But if it would cool down, the snakes will come back.
Maybe because Mayim Mecholim are different than Yain.
That, you mean the Yain always has this cooler, and Mayim Mecholim don't have that thing.
It's not about bubbling. It's Mevadua is bubbling, isn't it?
Correct. So that means that Mevushal means a higher temperature.
Higher temperature than what?
Higher than whatever Hirsiach means. The Hirsiach. No, it means that there's vapors coming out of it. It's starting to vapor. Okay, so then Rishak is right. It happens to be.
But it's interesting. Why isn't it wine and carbon bush also?
I don't remember if in the three dots there. I don't remember what the three dots say anymore. I'm sorry. Okay, it happens to be.
You could say that if you think Mevushal means it has to be for an extended period of time. You cook it up to reach a certain temperature, and then it's called Mevushal. It has to be maintained at a certain temperature for a certain period of time.
You can say whatever you want. You're saying is that the Mevushal and being Mevaveya and Mashke. It's not the same thing. It's a higher. There's something more that you have to do for that.
Right.
So they said that supports what these people who want to say what the shach means a higher temperature than just Mishra Hirsiach. Mishra Hirsiach is a lower temperature, and there's something beyond it. Okay.
Well, once wine gets to boiling, so what? Who cares if it's higher temperature? It's still boiling. Boiling is boiling.
It doesn't have to.
Because the word over here, boiling. This doesn't mean boiling.
Mevadua Mashka is boiling.
Oh, min hahevel.
We're not having. It's just the vapor together.
So both things
Even if it's not.
Okay, you'll soon see what he means on video. Okay. Because the right here has that, or the yain that's gilui. The fact the Gemara tells us the rules of gilui and of stam yain are the same thing. The Gemara uses the word interchangeably.
You could still see from this Rambam alone, using that logic, that there's a difference between.
Right. So I was about to say is the Gilui Marsha and Simon Kuf Tezayin, where this din is brought. He points out. Rabbi Shach didn't say this. The Gilui Marsha points out that this difference in the Rambam, the difference between Mevushal and a lower temperature. He doesn't say it in your wine. Rabbi Shach is connecting to wine, saying, look, the Gemara says Mevushal for Nisach and wine and Gilui are the same thing. So here we can pull out from this din over here that it should be the same. Okay. Not so relevant to what we had. It's just all right. Okay. So now. Rav Moshe, he told us, he mentions that the shear has to be Yatz display. And Rav Moshe then tells you how much Yatz display is. Okay, it's odd, just unexpected, if I use the word, unexpected that in, three different shuvas, two of them about Stam Yain and one about something else, he gives different numbers for Yatz display. Okay, so just surprising, you don't expect that. He says 160 and 165 and 175. Okay, so he'll read different ways. I don't know why. And in practice, the hashkachas assume like the 175 shear, and they say those who accept Rav Moshe's shear that it has to be Yatz, but will say that it has to be 175 degrees in order to be Mevushal. Okay.
The hashkachas assume that for wine or for Lakula also.
Lakul also. What do you mean Lakul also?
No, from Klios and Kalim and whatever.
No. I'm sorry. This is for when you're looking for temperature that's reach a certain temperature to be Mevushal. When you say a bleh happens at the other extremes of Yatz, so Rav Moshe himself talks about that in the same tshuva. They say the Yatz is way down there in the 115, 120 kind of a range, way down there. Right. But for this, it's in the area of the people who follow this assume 175. Okay? Now,
Quite hot, right? I mean, it's like less than that, right?
yes. In truth, more than one Posek has told me that's probably in the area of like 145, 150 kind of a temperature. That's what's really gets us.
145 in Celsius?
I don't know. So your phone knows. Okay? But they told me that it's probably like 145, 150 area. They'll the test with it, and other writers that they think it's more like that's more the truth. Okay. So now we now have to understand the other people don't give a number. The other people don't give a number. They just say it has to be hotter. Okay. So now I have a question. Before I get to tell you, to help you get to an answer of what that means, what is the temperature looking for, we have a very obvious question. Okay, the question is, Ramosha says, which seems straightforward, he says, if it gets to be Yatzla, he says it's obvious that it's Yismat Mimidasai. Okay, now, you could tell me he wasn't right or wrong, but it's hard to imagine there's a machlokes. Well, you mean there's machlokes for the Yismat Mimidasai? Is that Yad's Boy, not Yad's Boy? Go figure it out. I don't know. It seems like it doesn't seem like a logical thing to have a machlokes about. You can argue. We can argue. You can imagine placement arguing. What did the shach mean? Did he mean this or did he mean this? But they were talking about a practical thing. Is Yismat Midas the same as Yad's Boy or not Yad's Boy? Well, what kind of machlokes could there be about that? Okay? So Rav Asher answers the question. Rav Asher gives an answer that's a very, if I can use the word, traditional, to answer this kind of a question. How could there be a machlokes and metzias? We're going to have a machlokes and metzias. The answer that he gives it for here, but it's relevant to lots of other places. So he says like this. He says, everyone agrees, like Ramosha says, he doesn't use the name, but like Ramosha says, that when you hit Yatzla boy, it's, you will be misma'im midasai. The shaila is, do you need to have just any minimal misma'im midasai, any tiny amount of vapor escaping means it's less than it was before him, and if any tiny amount, that's what qualifies for Yismat Mudasai, in which case Yismat Mudasai and Yad Flint's are the same thing, as you'll see in a second. They're the same thing. Or do you say Yismat Mudasai means that it has to lose a significant amount? It has to be noticeably less than what it used to be. Well, if it has to be noticeably less than it used to be, it has to be noticeably less than it used to be, then it would have to be at a higher temperature. Okay, then it's not going to be the same thing. It only loses a little bit then. You have to get to a higher temperature to get to make it. So the shaila is not whether it's mismayim mudasai. Everyone agrees that at Yad Flint's place, this amount comes off, and at a higher temperature more comes out. But the question is, the machlokes is, how much does he have to get out? And therefore, they're not arguing the Matthias part of it. The Matthias is what it is. They're arguing on what the din required. What was the Yismat Mudasai? What did it mean?
My news amount comes out even without any cooking. It's constantly evaporating.
Okay, no. That's like way, beyond us. That's, okay, now. What would happen now? So what would happen now if I took, this is what Rabbi Lang was talking about before, and we're going to see more about it in a second. What happens if I took the juice and I got it to Yatzla this way, like Ramesh said, and I just told you that Rav Asher says, and you'll see it in a second live, so to speak, that it's mismayim maybe darasei, but Rav Asher said, but it only mismayim a tiny amount. Okay, so what happens if you keep it at Yatzla this way for 2 hours? Okay, what happens if you keep it for a long time? So even though the rate of coming out is very slow, but if you keep it there for long enough, so then that it will be mismayim maybe darasei. If everyone agrees that it's losing at that point, it's just it's not losing enough, and at a higher temperature it's a lot. So we're going to see. That's what he just said. Yeah, but that's like 1,000 years from now. You know what I mean? What? Okay, so the.
But not that's just noticeable, right?
Enough significantly. So the truth is
very undefined.
It's undefined. You can see what it is.
Whatever it is, that's it. You know what I'm saying?
So in the temperatures, I'm sorry that I don't have it for a chart here. I don't.
I'm not even talking about temperature. I'm talking about the quantity.
I know that you mean the quantity. I know that. I don't have my chart up here, but in my testing, it came out that's like at the higher temperatures, which is what the shear is going to be for the higher people, it has to be like 5 to 8%. Okay, and when they answered refuted, I said, what would you think it means is to be a significant amount is lost? He said you have to be able to notice it, like looking at it. If you looked at it before and you put a line on the cup and you see it later, so he couldn't put a number on it. What?
As soon as it hits that temperature, I mean, how long?
So you'll see. Okay, so like this. He said now. We have some of the people who want to follow the stricter shita, okay, and say that Yismat Mivdas is not the same thing as Hirsiach. So they say well, how much is that? So they say, it must be Russian, okay, and they say therefore it has to be 212, okay, or thereabouts. It has to be some kind of very high temperature, Okay? Now, there's two problems, the exact same problem in two different directions with saying that it should just be, make it to be 212. And the problem is like this. Okay? The problem is like this. That when you put alcohol boils, not at 212, alcohol boils at 173. Okay? That alcohol doesn't boil the same thing as water. So what happens is, if you take wine, and you take wine, the boiling point of wine is not 212 degrees. Okay? The wine that's going to be used in the examples we're giving in a second, the blue line is the one that we care about for us, and that is, the wine we care about is going to be at 12.5%. Okay, you're going to have to believe me. Okay, it's 12.5% alcohol, and according to the charts, it'll boil at 197. That means to say is, the water portion would boil to 12. The alcohol portion would boil at 173. The combination of them together makes it boil at about 197. Okay? Don't worry about the red line. Okay, the blue line is what we care about for now. The boils at 197. So the one side is, you want to say, if you want it to be boiling, if you have wine, wine doesn't boil at 212. Okay? Wine doesn't boil way before 212. Okay? And the opposite extreme is that grape juice doesn't either boil at 212, but it actually boils at above 212. Because it has sugar in it, it boils at above 212. Okay? So that's the opposite side of the same question. Okay, I'm going to show it to you in a second. Okay, it boils at above 212. So saying that randomly needs to be at Roshim, it could be that's what it has to be. But then Roshim doesn't mean 212. Roshim means it depends what kind of wine you have. Here's the blue line. The blue line is going to tell you at what kind of wine has to hit what kind of temperature, depending on how much percent of wine it is. So there's nothing wrong with that. But then you have to do that. But that's not how most people... What? No. Nobody in the modern era stands there and waits to see bubbles coming out of the thing. Okay? That doesn't exist. Everyone comes up with a number, and the rabbi tells them this is the number, and the Mashiach stands there and says, okay, when you hit this number, now it's good enough. Okay? Someone looks at a chart, and when it hits that number, it's good enough. Okay, so if that's true, then if you want to say it has to hit the mamash to boiling, then the number's going to have to be, look at your chart. For grape juice, it's going to be 214, you'll see in a second, and for wine, it's going to depend on how much alcohol there is. Someone's going to be sitting there making a cheshbon how hot it has to get.
Well, the grape juice also, I mean, it depends on how much sugar.
Yeah, potentially, it could be more or less, yeah, give or take.
Sea level also.
See, we have all kinds of things to think about. Okay, so now, but there's another, no. So let's do some fun things while we wait. Try to get a better answer, better shot. That's like this. Okay, this is grape juice. Okay, on the left side, you see grape juice at 165. The thermometer on the left side, you see the thermometer in the picture on the left side. So there's a set point, it's 212. It's stuck with that, and it's at 165. This is repeating itself. It's not going on. You're seeing the same thing. They say what? Yeah, of course. You're seeing you're seeing it repeat itself. Okay. So what you're seeing here, what you're seeing here is it's a gasoline at this point. Here, which says that, and actually the truth that says that it's always Yismat Mivdasai. When he says 165. So here's 165, and it's being Yismat Mivdasai. Okay, you see the vapors are coming out of it. Okay, the same ones keep coming again and again. Okay, the vapors are coming out of it because it's being Yismat Mivdasai. What I call it, it's having wisps. Okay, nobody looking at that would say it's boiling. Okay, I call this level wisps. When they get to Hagel's camels, we have a name for it. We call it wisps. Okay, just like these little vapors are coming out of this thing. Okay, so it's Yismat Mivdasai. You understand that someone looking at that, or if Ruslan says that it's not losing significant amounts like that. Okay, it's a tiny bit is coming out of it. Okay.
And also might be different between grape juice and wine.
Now, for wine, I don't have a picture of that. Okay. For grape juice, the left side is grape juice, and the right side is going to be wine.
It'll be more.
So right, but for wine, when I was doing wine, it probably had to do with the quality of the photography that was being done. That I couldn't get a match for this in wine. I tried, but I couldn't get a match in that in wine. Okay. So now it's like this.
Maybe alcohol doesn't. It's not visible like that.
Okay.
Alcohol label
Now,
is visible like water.
did I miss one?
No, just went to 194.
Sorry. Okay. This is
194.
194. Why are we missing something here? Okay. So here we have the. What happened? Sorry, guys. Okay. There's more. I don't know why this is not playing. Okay. Anyhow, let's skip this one. Okay. Now we have the grape juice is at 201. Okay. The grape juice is starting to boil. Okay. That one was just waiting because I didn't press the next button on it. Okay. The grape is starting to boil, and in my hashara, the wine is holding at about the same place at 187 degrees. Okay, which is not surprising to us. Okay, he's moving back and forth because it's repeating itself. Okay, so it's not surprising to us because I told you the boiling point for them is not the same. Okay, so the grape juice at 201 degrees is, we'll say it's considered to be boiled. They're roughly at the same place. Okay, boiling wise, you're starting to see the bubbles coming up. This is at 187. That's 201 degrees. Okay, and then And then, why is that one not playing? Okay, the boiler is even stronger now. The grape juice is at 210, and the wine is at 196. And you see the wine looks like even a little ahead of it. It's 196 degrees. And the boiling point is like, I told you that this wine, you believe me, is 12.5%. At 197 is its boiling point. Okay, so look what's going on here. Okay, and now, at the highest we could get it, or the highest for now that we could get it was, the grape juice at 214 is at a very serious boil. Okay, it's not a video, that's just a picture. And the wine is going strong like that. Okay, it's at 199 degrees. Okay. Okay.
The numbers aren't exact, right?
What do you mean the numbers aren't exact?
Yeah, it has to do with atmospheric pressure also.
That's with lots of things. Okay, and this is going on in my kitchen with one of my toy thermometers and like that.
The wine is much lower temperature getting the thing.
Right. The point here is, like as we expect, the wine boils way below what the grape juice does. The grape juice is even above.
Why are you calling one of the first pictures you showed where the grape juice was much lower than that and it was already starting to bubble? That's not called boiling.
So it is. It's a question. This is what you call a rolling boil. It's got a full, complete boil, which is similar sort of to this. Okay, and before it is sort of boiling, but this I would say, is that it's at its boiling point. The whole thing is boiling. Okay, before some of it was boiling. Okay, now, so there's a different way to look at this. Okay, until now I told you that people look at it in a sort of like a without an answer to say, well, it's got to be to a higher temperature. The higher temperature is completely boiled. So there's another way to look at it, and that is like this. The Rush said that in order to be Mevushal, we're going to learn out what the word Mevushal means. Is we're going to figure that out from Hilchos Shabbos. Okay? So now, in Hilchos Shabbos, what Moshe said is boiling water. The max is Yatzel Etzbay. Okay, but in fact, not everybody agrees that. Okay, not everybody agrees that. A number of them do not agree with that, and they say the following: what happens if you take a food, not a liquid, a potato, and you take a raw potato and you stick it into the oven on Shabbos? So when it gets to be machal ben drusoi, when it's past to be edible, you open on bishul. You mavasha that potato to get it from raw to being passably edible. Then the Be'er Halacha has a shiloh. What happens if you then take it from being kamachal ben drusoi to be completely cooked? So the Be'er Halacha is machmir that it's considered a second bishul. You will mavasha it further by taking it from kamachal ben drusoi to being bishul kotzorka. Okay, the Be'er Halacha is machmir like that. So now, what happens if you do the same thing with a liquid? You bring the liquid to Yatzel at this point. That's like kamachal ben drusoi. Okay, you bring it to the minimal. You're over an isser bishul. What happens if you take it from there further and you make it hotter than that thing? So Ramosh is bagel. Ramosh says there's no such thing. There's nothing, no difference. Once it's kamachal ben drusoi, that's it. You're finished. There's no further bishul to do if you go past that. A number of Achronim don't agree with that. Okay. That's not for today. There's a bunch of Hilchos Shabbos things that I'm going to pull aside, do separately. Okay, it's not for today. A number of Achronim disagree. And one of them who gives an example of that, one of the people who wants to explain what that means. Not what does it mean? I'm not talking about why it's Isser Bishul. But he says the following. He has a nafkamina to the fact that it's Isser Bishul, a nafkamina that applies to many people. And a nafkamina is like this. Okay, this is from Simcha Bun Cohen in the Shabbos home. Shabbos kitchen. Sorry, Shabbos kitchen. Okay, he says the following. He says, let's say I have a chunk, and the chunk is drying out. Shabbos morning, my chunk is drying out, and I want to get water to it. So what do? Is I can't put cold water because that would be a bishul. So I want to get hot water. So I go to the urn, and my urn has hot water in it. So what's wrong?
I never moved the right.
So okay. So he says, I go to the urn that has hot water in it, and I take some water from there and I pour it into the chunk. Okay, so I have to meet all the conditions of Chazara. That's not for today. I meet all the conditions of Chazara. I can pour the water into the chunk. He says this, wait a second. The water in your urn only got to, let's say, 190, 185, 200 degrees. That water in the urn didn't get to be roasted. He says, so now if you take that water that was only, let's say, 195 degrees, you take that water out of the urn, and you pour it into your chunk, what's going to happen in the chunk pot is going to get to be roasted. So there's a number of Achronim say, not like a Moshe, and these Achronim say that it's usher to take water from Yatzel at this point to be roasted, and that's exactly what you're doing. You're taking water from the urn that's 195, not at boiling yet, and you pour it into the chunk where it's going to become roasted. He says, you're not allowed to do that. Okay, that's what he says. Okay, that's what Rav Bun Cohen says, you're not allowed to do that. In fact, a number of contemporary Achronim agree with what Rav Bun Cohen says. Okay, but on Rabbi Langish directed me on the side in the kernel on their copy of Shabbos kitchen. Okay, this is what it says on the side of the copy. This is Rabbi Zucker. Okay, this is Rabbi Zucker. Okay, for those of you who can't read his scribbles, it says like this. Okay, he says, yeah. He says, I don't agree with it. He says, go look in the sefer called Mar HaShabbos. Okay, sefer Mar HaShabbos, and you'll see that in the sefer Mar HaShabbos, the answer from Zalman this question. Okay, in fact, the author of Mar HaShabbos asked this question to many people. Okay, and he asked this question from Zalman, and Rosh Zalman says that it's not true. Okay. Even though you could get water to up to 212, he says that's not Mevushal Kotzarka. Mevushal Kotzarka means is to the point that the max that people would consider edible. Okay, what do people want their water to be or their soup to be, or their hot cocoa to be when they want to drink it? He says, so Moshe's drinking coffee over here. He's not drinking his coffee at 212. Okay, he didn't make it to 212. He didn't make it Yatz Levis boy. That's questionable.
Official is not to get it to the point we didn't need.
So in it has to be edible, that's considered official. But then there's a higher level, which is, that's what the Bible looks at. There's a higher level when it's fully cooked. So in a potato, we know what it means fully cooked. He says, but in a liquid, fully cooked means taken from passably edible, meaning cold coffee doesn't taste very good. So you have to get to be absolute at this point, to be passably acceptable. But then there's a higher temperature that's considered to be as hot as anybody would want it to be.
But to be Mavash with something called sarcho, you're doing it hotter than you're going to actually eat it.
Because?
But you're not cooking it.
No, it doesn't need heat in order to make it more palatable. It just needs, because in coffee, the hotter the water doesn't make it more cooked. It just makes it taste better. You like the hot temperature. When you take soup out of the refrigerator, you want to heat it to a certain temperature because you like it at a certain temperature. You don't want to eat cold soup, you want to eat hot soup.
But I'm making a chunk, I'm making it hotter than I would eat it in order to prepare it.
In order to get it more edible. Make it more edible. Because it does more cooking to the food. Okay, so it's a fair question, but in plain liquids, he says that Mevushal Kotzarka means is Mevushal Kotzarka doesn't need to be roasted. Mevushal Kotzarka needs to be. So Rabbi Zucker said in here he didn't write it, but other people told me and he confirmed they think it's 190, and Rabbi Felder in Lakewood said 185 degrees.
That's curious. That's the thing.
185 degrees. Now. So I did lots of testing for that. That also didn't make it onto the chart. I'm sorry, but that did.
Depends on the person, right?
Yeah, so what it is testing to see is, well, what do people consider to be, what do the guys who make the urns and the people who drink the coffee consider to be edible? Okay? So, a little bit, it's a generational thing, which is to say is, when Rabbi Zucker wrote this on the side of the thing, the Colonel's urn, and the Colonel's still, the instant hot water is like 180 degrees.
It has to do with whether or not they're going to get sued if they get burned.
No. But now the more modern one, like the Colonel's new urn, okay, the one they use on Shabbos now, and other people's, the more modern ones go to like 200 degrees. Okay? When Rabbi Zucker scribbled this, the Colonel had a simpler urn.
They almost urn, when they first turn the water, they boil up. And then they make...
So that's generational. You think that that's what happens because that's what the urns that you're used to. But the urns that Rabbi Zucker looked at did not used to do that. Urns 10 years ago did not do that. Rabbi Zucker, I'm talking Rabbi Zucker now. Urns from 10 years ago didn't do that. They didn't bring it to a boil and then let it cool down. They didn't do that, okay? They just brought it to 160 degrees and then they stopped. Okay? They just stopped at that point. They just turned themselves on. And it's logical because when you make it really hot, you boil the water out. You're wasting energy for nothing. Okay, and the truth is, I'm not telling you now, I'm going to do this as a separate thing, I think, once. That has to do with the Iglei Tal. This whole thing starts from an Iglei Tal who talks about this kind of a shayla. So we'll put that on the side. That has to do with the shayla. But when Rabbi Zucker wrote this, or 10 years ago, that was the right thing to say. Now, maybe some people would say, nah, that's to be 200 degrees. But anyhow, Rabbi Zucker felt said the same thing.
He remembered it.
He did, but I asked him. The people have prepped me that he thinks
that's
I'm not such a bucky.
That's timeless.
I'm not such a bucky in the scribbles.
That's timeless.
Right, but that's
right. Necessary.
David, I'm not a bucky in every scribble in the Colonel's farm. Other people were. Now they tell me what they told me what was on. They said, yeah, that's not Chuffle, whatever. They knew exactly where to find it. So other people were like, but they told me he was going to say 190, which I asked him, what does he think? And he said 190. So that is to say so if the people are being machmir, okay, I want to say it's not enough to get it, you need to be Yismat Mimidaseh, which means Ramesh says, and that means is the max for Shabbos. Now, from Ramesh's perspective, the max for Shabbos is Yatz Levisboy. So he says that's a riot to him. But others might look at it and say, the max for Shabbos is, some people think 212, but others, like this, say the max is just, let's say, 190 degrees. Okay, now it happens to be. So what I'm saying, according to them, that would explain to us that the shear would be a lower amount, like 190-ish area, and it would explain to us this mysterious shear that you may know that the Tzelem Rav, just hashgacha on Grape, on Kedem, the earlier Tzelem Rav, set up that the share should be 190. Okay, now they do like 200. But the share at 190. Okay, and so far he has printed tshuvas, and I don't see any of them tshuvas about this topic, and I haven't yet found someone who could explain to me why he said 190. Okay, but now we found some kind of a possible hesper for it. Okay, why would he come? Where did the number 190 come from? Where did that come from? That you should say it has to be 190. What is that? What? It's not Rishkin, and it's not Yatz Lezer. What was 190? Okay, so this is a possible hesper for why the share should be 190. Now you should just know, just for your curiosity, that and we'll talk about that when we do it separately, is that this person from Rosh Shabbos asked the shadow to a number of people, okay, and the other people who he asked the shadow to, at least 2 other people that we know of that he asked the shadow to, said no, it has to be Royston. For Shabbos, it has to be Royston. And even Rosh Zalman, it's not so clear that he really agreed to. Rabbi Yisuk is reading a certain way. Okay, it's not so clear. He said to Rosh Zalman, says, isn't it true that you told me that just has to get to the amount that people would drink it at? And Rosh Zalman said, like, he gave a very unusual answer. It was like something like, make sure it's Yatz Lezer. It was like a very non-strong answer to.
So there's no way to say the John.
What do you say?
There's no way to say the John.
No, so Rabbi Zucker said you could. So if you have, go to Rabbi Zucker, and he'll tell you that. Or if you don't like it, go to Rabbi Zucker, and he'll tell you. And Ramosha for sure. Ramosha said that Yatz Lezer. What? I could not find the Rabbi Eider. I couldn't find it. I looked. I figured it for Ramosha. Oh, Ramosha, no. Ramosha said he wants to be Yatz Lezer. So Rabbi Eider for sure go along with it. Okay, he for sure would never. Okay. So give me a minute. I'm going to say one other part, just to finish up. Okay, I told you that the Machmirim say that there's not only does it have to be Yatz Lezer, but it has to be also Yismat Mimdasi. Okay, so both Rav Vosner and Diane Weiss talk about the exact same shaila, and that is what happens if someone is taking concentrated grape juice and they're concentrating it under vacuum. Okay, that means to say is when you put something into a vacuum. The boiling point is lowered. Okay, I once stood next to a machine that was concentrating actually grape juice or apple juice. I forgot which one it was, and it was under vacuum. Okay, it was, if I remember, it was 70 degrees Fahrenheit, which means when you touched it on your hand, it was cold and it was bubbling furiously. Because when it's under vacuum, the boiling point is low. The boiling point can go as low as 32 degrees. Okay, so you put your hand on it, it was ice. It was cold because it was 70 degrees, but it was boiling furiously. Okay. Not into the water. You couldn't put your hand into the water. Yeah, on the outside, and it was cold. Okay, but it was boiling furiously, and the reason, and that's exactly why they do it, because temperature is what ruins the taste. Okay, so if you want to make something concentrated, you want to get the water out of it. If you do that at a high temperature, you're going to ruin the taste also. So they do it at a low temperature. They put it into a vacuum and do it at a low temperature. So both Rav Vosner and Diane Weiss said, if you do that, it's considered Mevushal. They said because he hit both points. You got it to be Hirsiyah, not at 70 degrees. If you got it to be Yatz Lezer, it was Hirsiyah, and it was Yismayim Mimdasi. Now, you use a trick to get it to be Yismayim Mimdasi, but that'll be different. When I said it was Yismayim Mimdasi. Okay, now the Chiddush here, of course, is that usually we think of Yismayim Mimdasi means that you ruined it, that you heated it up so much that you ruined the taste of it. Okay, so here they tricked it, that the Dafka did not ruin the taste of it, but that both of them say, yeah, listen, you checked off all the boxes. Was it Hirsiyah? Yes. Was it Yismayim Mimdasi? Yes, even though you used a trick to do that. You didn't really be Yismayim Mimdasi in the traditional...
You mean that it's you could actually stick your hand in the boiling water? Or?
Yeah, well, you can't, if you suck your hand, you break the vacuum. But yes, the thing was cold. It's 70 degrees. 70 degrees on a thermometer, it's 70 degrees. Like if you touch something else at 70 degrees, that's exactly what it was. But it's boiling away. Okay, that seems odd, but that's just like this. Just what the boiling point is lower. Okay, lower the boiling point. Okay.
Why should that be a barometer in cooking, though?
You would think that you should look at it to see cook means as in temperature is what ruins the taste. You would have thought that. I would have thought they would say. Because why should you need to be mismayim b'midasi? What's the magic of being mismayim? So in Hilchos Trumas, we know why you need mismayim b'midasi. Because there the answer is, don't waste truma. So then what we care about is, did you waste it by boiling some of it out? Instead of 6 ounces, now you have 5 ounces. We get that. What?
It's not Shem Mevushal. Nobody's saying the bishul.
So you say, not for Hilchos Shabbos, it shouldn't be bitter. So they say, well, you get your siyah. Good, you check it off. Yes, I did that. And you say, well, that means mine. So how can you write anything Mevushal? So they both say that they would be happy. I was surprised by that. They were okay. Shabbos wouldn't be considered Mevushal. Okay. 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 Now there's another. No. There's another application that they didn't talk about. It would not. It would not cook one bit. It would be raw when it came out. Okay. Heat is what cooks things, not bubbles. The bubble is a trick. You're getting the vapor out of it without making it hot. It's a trick, but it's not making it cook. If you put it,
If you have
right,
it in the mountains,
if you put
boil eggs
it,
in the mountain, it takes much longer.
they can boil the water out. It's getting the water out. It's not going to taste it.
Because the water doesn't get as hot.
Right. If you put a chicken in there, it would not cook. It would still be raw.
Let's say 190, it's already bubbling.
Okay, so-
Water to cook.
No. That's only because you went to Tibet, you know. But if you go like to Denver, it's like 205 degrees, you know. You have to 190. You have to go like bounce like to Tibet, you know what I mean? But you go to Denver.
Possibly, this is considered.
Both of us and like both the people who are machmer on the shayla, both of us are saying you have to do like the shach said to make it even hotter. Then they both do about the same shayla. If I remember, it was not the same person asked them both, but the same shayla about what happens if it's concentrated, and they both very happy with it. I was surprised. Okay, now one other example that's more lamaisa for.
Takes away the cheshivas of the wine.
Okay, so now, other thing is, brandy. Okay, brandy, I'll remind you, is you take wine. The wine is, let's say, our example, 12.5%. And what you want to do is you want to make it to 40%. How are you going to make 12.5% to 40%? Here, instead of boiling out the water, you boil out the alcohol. Okay, I told you, alcohol boils at 173. So you make the water to 185, let's say. You make it to 185 degrees. The alcohol boils out, the water stays put, or most of the water stays put. The alcohol boils out, and then you capture that alcohol. You make sure it goes out in the pipe, and on the other end it cools down, and it drips into a container, and now you have concentrated. Instead of being 12% alcohol, now it's 40% alcohol, 60, whatever percent you want. That's how you make brandy. So that's another example where it might not hit the temperature that we're looking for of whatever the official temperature is, we're going to say for the machmirim, to say that in order to be considered mevushal. But it's another example. They're concentrated over here. Essentially that's what it is. It was hirsiach. It got over yatzal. It's got to be. Because it's got to be at least 173 to get the alcohol out. So it's over, it's hirsiach. You got to be yatzal at this point. And was it yismai? Of course it was yismai. There's a whole container full of what it was yismai. Okay, the amount that came off was yismai. So, of course, if the guy touched the wine before they made the brandy, that would be hopeless. Okay, it's too late, it's trade. But if they made the brandy with kosher wine, then once they made it, then according to at least the way Rav Vosner and Dynamites are saying, then it's going to be much according to everybody. Because it was hirsiach, got yatzah, but it was yismai miridasai, obviously, that's what turned into brandy, so they would both be mikol in that kind of case.
Drink the flavor of the wine that was yismai miridasai.
Yes, that's what you drink. You don't usually capture the vapors. Oh, you mean that vapor? Of course you could. So it's all mevushal. So mevushal. Okay, so now, I told you we have one more time to talk about. So now we talk about, if I could use the word theoretical, or Moshe gave a shear, we'll say 175 degrees. Some people might think the temperature is like a boiling temperature, and more accepted is that the temperature is in the area of 190 degrees. But next time we have some practical sides of how we do it.